I first and foremost want to thank our incredible panelists joining us today in this session. I also want to thank the conference coordination committee team, the moderator support today, Joel Mercado, and our translators. Thank you so much. Today we're joined by three incredible panelists: Carolyn Hoskinson, Director of the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency; Deanna James, President and CEO of the Senko Foundation for Community Development; David Haddock Domínguez, Vice President for Administration and Programs for Fundación Comunitaria de Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rico Community Foundation. And I have to excuse Cristina Miranda Palacios from the League of Cities, who unfortunately was not able to make it today to the panel, but we're very glad and grateful for Carolyn to be able to conduct her presentation today. So Carolyn, without further ado, I'm gonna be sharing the screen for your presentation.
I am here to talk about a very exciting time that we are having in my office, the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery here at US EPA. In November of 2021, let me get my years straight, we released our national recycling strategy, which we call part 1 in a circular economy series for all. And the terms circular and for all are very important as part of that strategy. So I think you all probably know enough about recycling to know that recycling alone is not going to solve the waste management issues that we have throughout our communities. And so when I talk about circularity, I mean that we need to consider all parts of the cycle of waste. We need to reduce the amount of waste we're generating, reuse materials as much as possible, and recycle the rest into inputs for new products. My dad, when I was a kid, was an economics professor, and he used to talk about supply and demand. And currently, we have a huge supply of potentially recyclable materials and not enough demand for what to do with those materials, so that the cycle is not working effectively. And so we're very excited that we released this recycling strategy so that we can work across all stakeholder groups, across government, across nonprofits, across companies, to ensure that we are designing products that are more recyclable, to make sure that we're collecting them effectively, and to make sure that those materials are being used as the inputs for new products so that we can truly have a circular economy. I also said for all is an important part of this issue. As I'm sure you know, the Biden administration has placed a huge priority on environmental justice, and we want to make sure that our waste management and our recycling facilities are not causing an undue burden on particular communities. And so that's very important to us as well. And we also want to make sure that all communities have access to recycling. So if you could go to the next slide. On the same day that we released the National Recycling Strategy, which was November 15th, which is America Recycles Day, I hope you all have robust family traditions to celebrate America Recycles Day every year on November 15th. On that same day, the president signed the bipartisan infrastructure law, which gave us funding for several projects. And I think, Carmen, the rest of the projects only appear when you hit the next button, I think. So thank you. So we got 2 grant programs that I'm going to talk about a little bit more on future slides, and then some work to do on batteries. And so I'll walk through them very quickly on this slide and then cover them in a little more detail. So the first of the 2 grant programs that we received was the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling. So we call that SWIFR for shorthand. We received $275 million for this grant program, given to us $55 million per year over 5 years, for a total over the 5 years of $275 million. And this is to support improvements to local solid waste management to assist and improve recycling. The second grant program that we received was for education and outreach around the reduce, reuse, recycle triangle that I'm sure we're all familiar with. So that was a total of $75 million given to us, $15 million a year over 5 years. And that's also a grant program. And as I said, I'm going to talk about both of those grant programs more on the following slides. In addition to the two grant programs, we received funding for EPA to do two pieces of work with regards to batteries. We got $10 million to spend to develop best practices to improve the collection of batteries so they can be more likely to be recycled. And then we also received $15 million to establish a voluntary labeling guidelines to improve battery recycling. This is also part of the federal government's effort to reclaim more critical minerals to be used in developing products. And if we can recycle more batteries and the critical minerals that are in them, we can increase the availability of critical minerals without having to rely exclusively on mining those critical minerals new. So if you could go to the next slide. This is that SWIFR, Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling grant program that I mentioned. Again, it's $55 million per year for 5 years. The goal is to improve recycling programs, post-consumer materials management, waste management infrastructure to improve and enhance recycling. You can see who the eligible entities are on your screen. And we're pretty excited about that new grant program. We are currently involved in extensive outreach to inform people about these new grant programs and to listen to input on how we should design them. These are grants that have never existed before. So we're designing this program for the very first time, and we're very interested in people's input. I'll talk more about how you can stay connected to what we're doing at the end. As Carmen said, I do have to disappear at 1 o'clock my time, but if there are any comments that people share in the chat after I've left, I'll be happy to follow up with folks and provide some feedback if I can. So on the next slide. This is our education and outreach grant program, which again, another completely brand new grants program we're designing from the ground up. You can see the eligible entities for that grants program on this slide. And again, doing a lot of stakeholder outreach right now to hear input from people to help us inform what we're doing. We're developing a toolkit under this effort as well, a model recycling program toolkit we hope will be helpful to folks. And on both the SWIFR grant program and on this grant program, we hope to very soon be putting out a request for information in the Federal Register as another way to get input on designing these programs. Next slide. So this is the most important slide because it tells you how to stay connected to our efforts here. If you click on that first link, well, I don't know if you can click on it in the presentation, but if you put that first link in your browser and get to that, you will get to a page where you can stay connected to the work that we're doing, and you'll get all of our emails and information about what we're doing with the National Recycling Strategy, these new grant programs, and all the work we're doing under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. You also see links here for our recycling strategy. And if you're interested in leading or supporting any of the actions in our recycling strategy, there's a link for that as well, and an email address where you can ask questions. So I think this is the most important slide, and I hope that'll be helpful to you. So that is a super fast overview of what we're doing, and I'm going to stop talking in case there are any quick questions that people want to ask me before I have to leave.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And what I'll do, I'll copy all the links and I'll put it in the chat so we could make sure everyone has access to the direct links right there. So thank you so much. I see that Hector has a question here. How does this initiative promote equity?
So that is a super important question. We have a number of, there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. So with regard to the grant programs, these grant programs are part of EPA's work under the Justice 40 initiative. And so we're working very hard to make sure that at least maybe more of the benefits from the program will flow to underserved communities. We also have a number of things in our national recycling strategy to ensure that recycling facilities are not over affecting certain communities, and also that recycling is available to every community. So that is, we're working really hard to work equity into both our strategy and our grants programs.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. So now we'll proceed for our next panelist. It's Deanna James. Deanna is the president and CEO of the Senko Foundation for Community Development, serving the U.S. Virgin Islands, dedicated to challenging the field of philanthropy to live up to its equity agenda. She continues to advocate for greater national philanthropic investment into the U.S. Caribbean. So I leave you with Deanna. Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this really important conversation. Kind of want to lead in with a quote that I borrowed from a colleague that I met at a Climate Strong Islands, a network convening that we're a part of in New York several years ago. And he said that small island states sit on the front lines of almost every vulnerability resulting from climate change. And that's the bad news. The good news is that we also sit on the front lines of the solutions. And I think that's a great way to frame this conversation. There's no question that the past 5 years have kind of transfixed much of our attention around the fragility and vulnerability of our coastal communities due to climate change. With billions of dollars in damages to the US Caribbean stacking up each year, the impact of environmental crises is both far-reaching and is demanding more of the field of philanthropy, namely that we become more adaptive, more responsive, and more innovative as community leaders. To provide some background, Senko Foundation was founded in 1990 in the wake of Hurricane Hugo. We are a 31-year-old hybrid foundation, so we're both a grant maker and a program administrator, direct service provider. The wide-ranging needs of our community after Hugo served to inform the foundation's broad programmatic and operational wingspan, which includes community revitalization, economic development, youth and education, and nonprofit capacity building. As a place-based foundation, our primary place of service is St. Croix for most of our programming, but our service area extends to the whole territory relative to policy, advocacy, and data collection. Over the course of the past 31 years, we have been a conduit of over $42 million in investments into the territory. Because we are a community foundation serving an isolated and underserved place existing under a colonial umbrella, nothing about how the Senko Foundation operates is conventional. What our founders knew at our inception is that to be effective, to be truly equity centered, we had to do things differently, and different for us has meant that we cannot solely rely on grant making to fulfill our philanthropic mission. Instead, the grant making that we do has to be innovative, has to be strategic, and must include intensive grantee mentorship and coaching. Different for us also means that data collection has to be a critical component of high impact investments. We oftentimes have to develop programs to fulfill or to fill critical public sector gaps, and that is part of the reason of our format as a hybrid foundation. And quite distinctive of all, I think, is that for the past 31 years, the foundation has served as the preeminent fiscal sponsor in the territory, supporting and incubating over 250 social impact organizations and projects. I think one of the other really core pieces of how we operate is that we do not shy away from public policy. or from community convening and advocacy, including advocating to government partners, both federal and local, to prioritize NGOs and the oftentimes voiceless people that they serve, and to ensure that they're not an afterthought, but a forethought in the recovery and climate adaptation process. Ultimately, St. Croix Foundation is the territory's loudest advocate to national philanthropy as we tirelessly seek to compel greater inclusion and investment in the US Virgin Islands in equitable and proportional ways. Back in 2017, immediately before Hurricanes Irma and Maria, there was no way for us to predict that our 30th anniversary would find us once again facing so many of the same conditions that existed at our inception. In fact, the impact of Irma and Maria on the territory underscored the relevance and need for a community organization like St. Croix Foundation. In fact, all of the things that our founding board prioritized, all the investments we were making before the storms of 2017 were all still very relevant after the storm and still remain relevant throughout the pandemic. Our holistic approach to recovery after the storms ultimately has been intuitive. Expanded nonprofit operational capacity has been a priority. It was a priority before the storms. It continues to be a priority for us, even more so now. Investing in community resilience hubs, and sustaining an unwavering commitment to systems thinking, with the recognition that everything is connected to everything. Some of the things that we knew very quickly not to invest in were things that the federal government would pay for. And as I think is the case in Puerto Rico, there was a significant influx of federal dollars that came in after the storms, and with the recognition, the keen recognition that in communities like ours that are under-resourced, that have very shallow donor pools, we have to be really intentional about where we direct our scarce resources. Ultimately, I think from the vantage point of philanthropic lens, the overarching role that the foundation plays in serving a community like ours that has such a magnitude of crises and challenges facing us on a regular basis, including climate change, is the understanding that we have to support community adaptation and emergence. To be equity vigilantes, we are unabashedly committed to ensuring that at every level of our society that equity is a central focus. And then also just centering the foundation as a community hub, particularly for our nonprofits. In terms of actual programming, the investments we made after the storm were all very holistic. We're all informed by the relationships we've nurtured with our nonprofits, all prioritizing capacity building for nonprofits, as well as innovation and equity. The first investment that we made after the hurricane was around solar supported community center and workforce development initiative, in which we trained and certified local youth to become solar installers through a 6-month national certification program. Those students went on to solarize 2 local community centers, which are sited in the most vulnerable communities. Every single one of our young people in our program were subsequently hired full-time during the pandemic at a time when so many people were losing jobs. And both of the solarized community centers, one in an elderly independent living community and another one serving at-risk youth, were able to continue to serve clients safely and consistently through the pandemic. This pilot program, which we incubated, is currently being transitioned over to one of our sponsored NGOs, our local long-term recovery group, as they transition into an independent 501c3 entity. Our next investment was around agriculture and entitled Farm Tienda, which was yet another early recovery project, and in part brought to us by Coca-Cola, as they were seeking to build a project similarly entitled Pop Tiendas in Puerto Rico. And the project, Paptienda project, was intended to support small mom and pop businesses damaged by the storms. We had to, do a lot of convening and have conversations with Coca-Cola to determine that that was not the right fit for us, that we wanted to do something differently, and we really wanted to focus on food security here in the Virgin Islands, and directing investments to farmers, many of whom lost entire yields during the storm. To date, we have designed and awarded 7 container farm stands that are solarized, Wi-Fi'd, and even during the pandemic served as resilience hubs for isolated, vulnerable communities where they're sited. They also supported local farmers in expanding their businesses in the aftermath of the storms. Our next investment that we're leading right now and we're spearheading is funded by a hazard mitigation grant from FEMA. And it's the restoration of a dilapidated movie house that we are renovating and will be transformed into a state-of-the-art performing arts center and a modern community disaster shelter. This holistic project was actually conceived from the dynamic collaborations that we fostered between our federal partners, our NGOs, and our team at the foundation, all working together out of our office immediately following the storms for about 2 months. The foundation ultimately owns a 12,000 square foot theater that has sat as part of our property portfolio for many years. And through conversations with FEMA and some other of the early federal responders that came in after the hurricane, were directed to funding sources that would allow us to think even more broadly than we had originally considered for the restoration of the theater to become, I think, one of the largest downtown community disaster shelters in the territory. And then also during Blue Skies, obviously, convening space for the community as a performing arts center. When all is said and done, the space will be able to host a capacity of around 300 to 500 persons during a disaster. I think that the most important investment that we made before the storm, that we continue to direct investments to after the storm, and will continue to do so into the future, is around obviously how we support nonprofits. And not just supporting individual nonprofits, but really committing to building a consortium of nonprofits. And I think, of all the things I feel most proud of at the foundation is what we've been able to do over the past 5 years. We launched the consortium in 2016, almost exactly a year before Hurricane Maria, comprising 30 nonprofits who are working collaboratively across 4 sectors. That's heritage, arts and culture, health and human services, built a natural environment, and youth and education. Our strategic priorities around the consortium have been in cultivating trust between nonprofits and with us as a convener, encouraging nonprofits to leverage resources by nurturing a culture of collaboration, obviously strategic grant making, building greater competencies in our nonprofit sector around collecting, analyzing, and using data to build compelling philanthropic cases for support. And sometimes, and hopefully one of our partners will be presenting later on, we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that the foundation has provided political cover for some of our smaller nonprofits who have to navigate a politically punitive environment when attempting to advocate for equity, for environmental and social justice, for vulnerable populations that they serve. To wrap up, I think it's important to note that so much of the conversations after disasters, or when we talk about climate, socioeconomic resilience, is focused on physical infrastructure. The foundation For us, the focus has been on hardening social infrastructure by investing in innovative ways to build redundant social service systems, by encouraging NGOs to merge or to collaborate in dynamic ways as essential mechanisms for sustainability, and by helping NGOs to wean themselves from their dependence on local government funding so that they can be free to advocate. A systems change colleague of ours recently shared something that I think is so incredibly profound and relevant for this conversation around change and transformation in communities like ours. And she said, relationship is the resolution. And I think that that's so important, that because so much of how we have operated over 31 years has been rooted in nurturing and building our competency around building powerful relationships, with the recognition that the USVI and Puerto Rico are oftentimes relegated to international status and thus excluded from national philanthropic funding opportunities. And also with the keen understanding that our policymakers so often advance capitalist leaning and equity void agendas. The foundation is aggressively cultivating relationships with national funders, with federal partners to ensure equity, and to make a strong case for reparative justice from the federal government and for reparative investments from national philanthropy, all through the building and nurturing of relationships. And so I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity.
David Haddock is Vice President of Program and Administration of the Puerto Rico Community Foundation. He is responsible for providing strategic direction to the Puerto Rico Community Foundation to increase community capital as part of the foundation's programs and projects. He also serves as official vice president of the subsidiaries of Puerto Rico Community Foundation Services, a corporation providing direct services to the community, and Community Investment Fund, Inc., an impact investment and loan program launched by the foundation in 2014 to increase the financial capital in communities, stimulating the creation and retention of jobs and businesses. As vice president of the foundation, he has been responsible for overseeing 55 million in awards for programmatic activities in the communities. Thank you so much, David, for joining us, and looking forward to your presentation.
Muchas gracias, Carmen.
Thank you very much, Carmen. I would like to start by thanking you for all the support and everything that you are doing in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, from EPA and also Hector Vélez, and you have been both great allies for the work of the Fundación Comunitaria. And we're going to see some projects that we are working along together. And the presentation, I will be doing it in a chronological order, so you may see how the work has been moving ahead after the hurricane, particularly Hurricane Maria. So you may see the chronological order of how the strategies have been developing on these projects. It is important that Fundación Comunitaria have been working for more than 35 years in Puerto Rico. It is the only community foundation, the first Spanish-speaking foundation in all the world. And our mission is very important, and our vision for the work that we are doing, we are three main functions. It is developing the community's capacity, and it also has the transformation function that we have it in our mission, and also to maximize philanthropic investment that we are receiving from the donors and also from the community, and to have an economic yield of each of these contributions. And that's what we are looking for in the Fundación Comunitaria. In terms of the work post-disaster, I like to show this sequence since the immediate relief, that it is basically survival mode, And those who have gone through an emergency, you know what we're talking about, where you need to respond immediately. And without any planning, just survival mode, because your life is being threatened. And then we have a second stage of recovery, and those are urgent issues, and we have action plans, and we start identifying strategies, and eventually a phase, a stage of rebuilding and mitigation. And we're talking about sustainability, transformation, and long-term planning, going from resilience to sustainability. And it is a stage of more clarification, and we are seeing it in the projects that we are working right now in Fundación Comunitaria, some with funds from the private sector and some with federal funds. Also, since the beginning, we were able to identify, and this is really important to understand, the community profile that we have. The emergency allowed us to go out stronger, outside the metro area where most organizations are focused. And certainly we are addressing all the island, but after the emergency, we had the opportunity to work strongly, actively, and continuously with the communities in the center of the island, rural communities, remote communities, in the central mountainous area of the island, with an infrastructure that was very damaged, particularly the public services, the utilities like energy and water, geographical areas and families with low and moderate income, and also vulnerable areas in terms of landslides and poor housing conditions. But I would like to highlight on the fourth item that many of these communities had and still have, they continue having a strong leadership. And this is really important when we're talking about working with these communities. Within this movement of what was the immediate response, the relief to the recovery, we established a programmatic strategy that was thought to access basic resources, the immediate and more important resources, water, energy, housing, food, employment, but also energy and water. And those are fundamental, and thinking from a perspective that the community may be the owner of these assets. Also, through technical assistance, they may have all the tools in order to manage this. And this is in order to move ahead and think from a resilient point of view, moving to the sustainability in a way that this may be projects that are thought for a long-term use for the community. Right now, I am showing you an example of how we can see that evolution of the energy strategy. And this is in a chronological order as the foundation work on this. We have received support from many foundations from the US, the diaspora, many Puerto Ricans in the US, and I would like to highlight particularly many foundations supported us. And we received support from several foundations. And at the beginning, in terms of the energy strategy, we started with donations for gas, money, diesel, including light bulb, solar lights or solar lamps. And then we moved to power generators, and that was the immediate relief. But seeing it from a climate change perspective or environmental justice, it is not appropriate. So then we move to solar systems. And then Fundación Comunitaria, since we work with the communities as a collective, we move to the concept of solar communities and microgrids. And we work this based on donations and the financial support and technical assistance. So the technical assistance, we have incorporated it within the services that we provide in the Fundación Comunitaria. And I am going to focus on water and energy because it is the most important after an emergency. And we can see that evolution of our support for the water strategy. At the beginning with Hurricane Irma and later Hurricane Maria, just a few days later, we were able to provide the financial support and bottled water for the immediate need of water. Later, we were able to provide water cisterns or water tanks, and then we moved to purifiers. And within the strategic discussion on how we could move to transformation elements that may be resilient and sustainable, we work with the community aqueducts. And for those who don't know about this, the community aqueducts in Puerto Rico are organizations, communities that supply their own water. The government do not supply the water for them, and they work their own drinking water. And the water they use not only as drinking water, but all the daily tasks. Many of these communities didn't have any water because they work with water pumps that extract the water from the wells. And since they didn't have any power, they couldn't extract the water. So many communities, they had no power for 10 months and no water because they couldn't have electricity for the water pumps. So they didn't have water nor power for several months, and they had to carry water to their communities. In terms of the goals for sustainable development, I would like to mention that in 2019, we had a retreat with the staff for the Fundación Comunitaria. We dedicated a work day to work on the sustainable goals and how the foundation was working with these goals. And you can see them on the screen. And this is how, in the order that we worked them and how we were understanding these goals within the work of the foundation. For example, number 7, affordable and clean energy. Number 6, clean water and sanitation for drinking water. And also we incorporated gender equality as a programmatic transversal in all the programs of the foundation. We should not lose perspective that a study done by Osman regarding the lack of water in community aqueducts in the rural areas of Puerto Rico, they determined that the most affected were women who were working day to day in terms of taking care of the sick, of how the roles are still being dealt in homes. So the men were looking for the water, but the women were the ones using the water to do the laundry and work in their homes. So women were very affected by this lack of water situation. And eventually we understood that after the emergency, we are talking about climate change and the actions that we are taking. And we understand that this is a programmatic issue that started officially with the emergency. I would like to mention item number 2, that recently we received support from the Man Foundation so we could measure those achievements, have those metrics and those to measure those outcomes and to be able to share those initiatives. And this is a project that recently started with the support of the Mount Foundation. And in terms of the renewable energy projects, I will go quickly over this so then we can have time for some questions. And I am starting with health, and we are supporting 37 community health clinics, primary care clinics, and they are receiving solar energy for their emergency rooms and for the refrigeration of vaccines. And then regarding the earthquakes that we had in Puerto Rico, we established 3 mobile units. So these clinics The nurses could go to remote areas to take care of their patients. Also, in terms of housing, we supported the rehabilitation of 30 households in the town of Loíza with solar systems. And it is important to highlight that those who don't have ownership of their houses, we are working to help them achieve that ownership of their houses. So it is important to highlight that as well. In terms of water, we supported 6 community aqueducts with solar systems, and now we are working with an opportunity and the potential to continue working with 100 additional community aqueducts to support them with solar energy. And this is part of a mitigation project funded by FEMA. And they will start building this on 2023. In terms of other renewable energy projects, we have 3 resiliency hubs for community services, including solar energy. And in terms of workforce development, we supported 1 hydroponic center working with functional diversity people, and it is totally solar. And on the right-hand side, we financially supported with and technical assistance to the Comunidad Solar Toro Negro with 28 households, and also an elderly home, Esperanza Village in Juncos, and they are very low income people. And we also had a co-op in the community of San Salvador in Caguas, and we supported them with financial aid and technical assistance. And we also are working with the Clean Energy Community Corridor, and we are conducting a study for feasibility analysis and quick reference to establish a solar community and how so the community can see and identify the resource that are available. In terms of energy, we have the Culebra Renewable Energy Project, and this was an initial contact that we had with the EPA, and this project was funded by the Economic Development Administration and Fundación Pérez. This project is contemplating providing solar energy for 50 businesses, critical facilities, and organizations. And since they live in an island, so they continue having power after any emergency crisis, and they may continue with their tourist activities. The federal agencies does not allow to transfer the assets, and that's why Fundación Comunitaria established a subsidiary, and they are going to apply for the permits to help with the energy. Another project that we have is an initiative from the Rockefeller Foundation to establish a financing fund, and they are combining financing funds and grants to lower financing barriers and increase local capacities for access to renewable energy. So they have a lower cost for this, for financing this equipment. In terms of water, we are supporting 65 community aqueducts, and we have received a lot of support from EPA. We have been able to share the information about the job that we are doing in the communities, and 18 communities receive financial support, especially for infrastructure and also for compliance, administration, and community organizations. And 6 aqueducts were able to install solar energy panels. We also provided financial support to 13 community aqueducts to buy disinfection equipment because they had more use of the water, and the cost increased to treat the water, and also the water bill increased. And we are supporting the establishment of the first association that is going to unite a community aqueducts in Puerto Rico. The Community Aqueducts Network, it will be launched now in May of 2022. Some projects, and I will go over this quickly, we supported financially a community in Ituado so they could have a seeds bank because they realized that it was a farming community, and after the emergency, they had no plantations, no seed, so they established the seed bank. And also a project in Las Maria to harvest rainwater so we could help with cleaning the houses. In terms of the impact of the municipalities in Puerto Rico, these are the municipalities that have been impacted with technical assistance or funds, 60 municipalities. And it is important to highlight that I am very proud to show you the achievements that we've had with all the solar energy installed. It is 1.3 mega watts per hour. And using the calculator from EPA, we were able to calculate the kilowatts hour annually. And the calculator says that it is the equivalent to 285 gasoline-powered passenger vehicles. The greenhouse gas emissions were reduced to the equivalent of 50,000 incandescent lamps switched to LEDs, and the equivalent to reduce to avoid the use of 148,000 gallons of gasoline. So it is important, this environmental justice, because it is essential that we have been able to support communities with the distribution of drinking water to 3,600 families receiving drinking water. And now with the mitigation project that I mentioned earlier, this number may increase to 70,000 people. And finally, some pictures so you can have an idea of the projects that we have been working on and supporting. And you may see the mobile units on the right-hand side, on the upper, on the top of your screen. And these are in the communities in Caguas, in Toro Negro. You may see on the left-hand side, one of the centers, 330. This is in Guanica. This is a health center, and they were able to use solar energy to protect the vaccines that they had refrigerated. And on the right-hand side, you may see the hydroponic center in Ay Bonito. And here I would like to see, for you to see some of the water tanks for some community aqueducts. And on the bottom, you may see the community, you may see the land, and what we're talking about, the rural and mountainous area, and the challenges that they are facing with this infrastructure. Thank you so much, David.
Your experience truly highlight that those who are closest to the issues knows what works best. Both of your entities with more than 30 years of experience, support organizations built around community-driven solutions. You're informed by direct on-the-ground experience of community leaders, and truly solutions for the people created have the greatest chance of successfully changing the current conditions and the status quo. So again, thank you for the amazing work that you do day to day. As a federal agency, EPA has seen the incredible impact that it has to collaborate with entities such as yours in the work that we have done in disaster recovery. I know we have 5 minutes and I have just a short presentation, but I'm not going to give it because I want to make sure that we allow for all our participants to share their questions. But I would like to share, from our perspective right now from EPA, we're going to be managing a historic amount of federal funding, a once in a generation disaster recovery funding, but also the infrastructure bill, bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently approved, which will provide millions and millions of dollars to strengthen infrastructure, for example, drinking water, water management, sanitary waters, but also solid waste management, recycling, as Carolyn mentioned earlier in the presentation. As an NGO, what would be your recommendations? Because we saw from your presentations how to better engage, because a lot of these fundings typically go to the central government and then it's managed by the central government to be used by the local entities. And based on your experience, what would be your recommendations to the different federal agencies that have been collaborating in the organization of this conference to make sure that we achieve transformative systemic changes funding that will actually result in important, significant investments in the communities that you serve?
I'll take a stab at that. I think that's such an important question to us because unlike Puerto Rico, we don't have municipal government in the Virgin Islands. And so our nonprofits serve as municipal entities, but the lack of decentralization of funding and resources is such a huge obstacle for us to actually to move the needle on some of these like really deeply entrenched social issues that we contend with in our communities. And so for us, the advocacy we've been doing with our federal agencies is to identify those nonprofit organizations that have capacity and ensuring that the resources flow down to the lowest sort of like sectors of our community, like our nonprofits, our NGOs that have capacity to manage them and that they don't get sort of stuck in some of the federal, our local government agencies that actually don't have a lot of capacity either. And the bureaucracy that exists in those agencies means that a lot of times those dollars either go back or they don't get allocated or spent in time. And so I think that is one of the ways that the foundation has been advocating, whether it's HUD or EPA. And then our role as a fiscal sponsor is, that's such an important role that we play because it is allowing nonprofits to build necessary capacity so that they can access those resources.
And that is right on track. And right now, the agency is going to be going through some listening sessions to make sure, through the Justice 40 initiative, and I know our regional administrator, Lisa Garcia, yesterday presented the requirements that, 40% of all the investments that are going to be used as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law have to be focused, and other investments within the federal government has to focus on equity, on ensuring environmental justice, and that it goes directly to the communities. And in the case of the drinking water and wastewater, clean water, construction grants or state revolving funds, it's really exciting to see that it's also the new guidance is that 49% has to be provided to local communities through grants or basically no interest loans. And truly that's a major shift, because before it was less than 10%. And a lot of these local communities were not getting these infrastructure funds that are so essential for the work that they do. David.
Sí, gracias.
Thank you. Yes, you already talked about the public policy, and I think that keeping that public policy work, not all foundations work with public policy issues, and right now this is an opportunity to work in infrastructure, and we are focusing on supporting the recovery efforts in energy and also in water, but most to solar energy. And it is important to be able to keep these funds with certain patients. The funds are available, so we may learn about these funds and know that they are made public, but sometimes the due dates are challenging. Sometimes it is very complex to prepare the proposals. So we need to have some technical support in order to prepare the proposals and also in the operation, because many organizations, and I am talking about the third sector, nonprofit organizations, this is the first time that they are working with federal grants, and they need to adjust all the procurement policies to these federal funds, and also the matching that would bring some calmness. If we need to do a match, many of them would be outside that requisition, and some funds are expiring this day, the intention letters. This requires a matching, and to see how we could receive that technical support, and maybe some collaborations that we could work on time, because this is very complex to work with, in order to work with the matching. And also, I would like to mention some opportunities. I know that ARPA funds were just approved and the deployment was made in Puerto Rico, that one of the sections is for water, for projects which are eligible for the Clean Water Act and for the Drinking Water Act. And I think this is a great opportunity, but how do we work this with the municipalities? There's a lot of work to be done, and I know that this is not easy, this is challenging and complicated, but the funds are available. So we need to find a way on how we can make it possible to receive those funds. Thank you so much.
For this input. I'm sorry that time has run out. I know we have to finish 2 minutes ago. So again, thank you both for an extraordinary presentation and engagement. For all of you participating, please feel free to contact directly Deanna and David. I know they're very accessible and can provide additional input for other ideas or information that you would like to receive directly from them. And as coordination team of the conference indicated, we're going to be sharing the presentations as well as the videos of this conference with everyone. So, un millón de gracias.